every local currency or competing currency must have an exchange rate with federal dollars so that,
Obviously, yeah. And so
yes,
what would happen then is as the prices of those products were to rise in terms of U.S. dollars, the exchange rates would rise, and so people would have to spend more and more money. It wouldn't be a fixed regime like you have now, where it's 95 cents, but your
right.
Berkshires might start to sell for $1.50, $1.75, $2, and so forth.
Right, and then quickly become a more valuable currency within the local community, thereby encouraging
Hmm.
more local production, more
Oh,
local jobs.
it can even expand. I mean, who knows? One day they might be trading futures on Berkshires,
Uh,
Where Wall Street can get involved and start creating derivatives and betting on the exchange rates. But I
well,
mean, all joking aside, let me say something serious. Do you understand though that what you're doing, and I applaud it. I think it's great. Is you're trying to come up with alternatives to a weakening dollar that is losing its value, that offers no interest rates. You're trying to give citizens, residents of the Berkshire, a better choice than the choice they're being presented with by the Federal Reserve. But do you realize that in doing that, according to the government, you are committing an act of domestic terrorism, and you actually risk federal prosecution under the counterfeiting laws? Did you realize that?
we've done our research. As long as it's not, the Berkshires don't look like the federal dollar, we're not stepping over any boundaries.
Yeah, but
And
a recent prosecution, you got to watch this case very closely, having to do with Liberty dollars, which are coins that are made out of gold and silver. They don't look anything like Federal Reserve notes either. There's nobody in the world that would confuse them. And I think what the prosecution said in their press conference, they said that competing with the U.S. dollar, offering an alternative, is undermining our monetary system and an act of terrorism. So they're redefining counterfeiting not to try to confuse somebody into thinking that what you're giving them is a dollar, but offering them a viable alternative. If you try to encourage people to not use dollars but use something else instead, they're now defining that as counterfeiting. That's the problem.
Peter, I think you and your listeners need to look at that ruling much more carefully, and it differs hugely from the way Berkshires are shaped.
Mm-hmm.
And if your listeners go to the Berkshires website and look at our other resources, you will see a chapter from Louis Solomon's book on the legal aspect of local
Oh,
currencies.
I'm not saying that you're breaking the law. Not at all. I think what you're doing is totally legal. I'm just saying the government is breaking the law. The government is, see, as the government creates inflation and starts to steal our purchasing power, people like what you're doing are going to try to come up with ways to protect people. And the government doesn't like that. I'm saying the government is breaking the law, and the government at some point might try to come after you for doing something that is perfectly legal, because we have a corrupt judiciary and a corrupt government. So don't confuse what I'm saying with, hey, I think you're doing something wrong. You're doing everything right. And I do believe it's a little bit what at least the Liberty dollars, they use the word dollars, and you're not using the word dollar anywhere on the Berkshire. But it's just a question of, it's not a big stretch to go from one to the other. Once the government is already operating outside the law, they'll just keep pushing the envelope. Now, this case has been appealed, so we'll see what happens. Maybe we'll get an honest judge that will throw out this counterfeiting conviction, but we'll see.
Well, yes, and remember that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, every commercial bank issued its own independent currency. That right was never outlawed. It was just the convenience of a centralized currency that made us all move to trade in the dollar. But regional currencies, according to the wonderful planner Jane Jacobs, are elegant tools for affecting regional economies.
Well, absolutely
And
right.
yeah,
There is nothing that prohibits individuals either. The federal government is not allowed to issue paper money because it doesn't have the authority to do it. That's why you have the Fed doing it. But the Constitution applies to the government. It doesn't apply to individuals. And individuals, corporations, and states have the right to do that, although states are barred from making anything but gold and silver legal tender. So if they want to make something, they couldn't make, for example, the state couldn't make your Berkshires legal tender. But just because something isn't legal tender doesn't mean it's illegal for people to transact in it.
Correct. And we also want to encourage that nonprofits be issuers of currencies. Berkshires Inc. is a nonprofit, open membership, democratically structured, so that it's an organization that actually represents citizens in our region. And the huge power of a local currency is to actually make loans, create money at the point of making loans for new production.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you'll be able to have more capital because people will actually be willing to save these Berkshires. In fact, eventually you might even be able to develop deposit-taking institutions that will actually pay interest on Berkshire deposits. So in addition to retaining their purchasing power, they will actually increase it because they'll be able to earn interest, and people could actually take out loans in that currency.
Absolutely. So we're doing this as a way to encourage new import replacement businesses for our region and make sure they're not just in food, but in shelter, energy, clothing. We become more secure, more self-sufficient, get back to producing locally.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of course, a lot of the merchants. Because remember, if you're a farmer and you're selling local milk, you need to be able to get your import costs also, because otherwise you're vulnerable to the rising prices because you're committed to selling them for Berkshire. So you have to be able to get all of your inputs the same way, so that your costs aren't rising, but your revenues are stuck.
And that's our challenge: is to begin to identify where the leaks are in our local economy.
We got to run. The other problem is going to be taxes, trying to figure out income taxes and gains and all that. That's going to be the nightmare when the tax man comes in. But anyway, I wish you luck. You're doing the right thing. Thanks for being a guest on my show.